It's the early 1990s, the Pacific coast of Mexico. A small fishing vessel, well, not too small because it was holding 20,000 kilos that belonged to a guy named Juan Carlos Ramirez, who was part of the North Valley Cartel. And this fishing vessel is going up the Pacific coast, and the captain has been getting high on his own supply. He's supposed to rendezvous with Amado Carrillo Fuentes, who later became known as the Lord of the Skies. He's the kingpin from old Mexico that died during plastic surgery. And he's supposed to rendezvous with him and pass the load over, but he's been getting high on his own supply, and he thinks the U.S. Coast Guard is following him, and he dumps the entire load into the Pacific Ocean. Now, at some point, he comes to his senses, and I guess he lets his superiors know, or they find out, and the Sinaloa's corruption ran so deep that the Mexican federal police take the captain out in a helicopter to fly over the ocean and the coast and look for where this load might be. He's not able to be helpful. We don't know what happened to the captain. I'm sure it wasn't good, but the Sinaloa cartel was able to weather that huge financial loss, which would have been in, I mean, wholesale, I don't know, that 20,000 kilos is, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Even if they were paying, let's see, 200,000, 2 million, it was probably a $20 million wholesale or something loss. But they had teams of trained divers, probably from some military special forces, looking for it underwater for a year. And they eventually found it because it was wrapped watertight. And we know this story because it's told by the owner of the yayo in question, the 20,000 kilos, Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia. And he told the story during his testimony against his old business partner, El Chapo, a few years back. And Ramirez's nickname is the Lollipop because back in the early 2000s when he was trying to kind of avoid capture and detection by Colombian and other police, he moved to Brazil and he got all this plastic surgery on his face. He looks pretty bizarre, like a vampire or like a comic book villain. And but he sat on the stand, testified against El Chapo. He was a leading figure in the North Valley Cartel, which emerged well, during the time of the Cali Cartel. Actually, they were a rival to the Cali Cartel, and that became known as the Cartel of Snitches because so many of them turned state's evidence. Ramirez worked a deal some years back. He got like 28 years, but he only did 4, and he got out and he kept in the game. But let's go back to when he met El Chapo in 1990 in a hotel room in Mexico City. So this was a time period where the Mexicans were kind of, well, they weren't taking over from the Colombians because the Colombians are the only major producers of the substance in question. But the problem for the Colombians was, well, the hassle was getting it over the border into the U.S. And then America doesn't have a big Colombian population, so they were always having to find different people to that they didn't know or have a family connection to dispose of the product. I mean, that's why, of course, the 80s, you have all the infamous black the drug kingpins from the big cities, you know, the Demetrius Holloways and the Fritzes and etc., who had direct plugs with, say, Colombians or Dominicans. But so starting there in the late 80s, early 90s, the Mexicans, who have lots of their family members and people they know from Mexico scattered out all throughout the U.S. and can distribute it, they started out doing deals with the Colombians like the one that El Chapo proposed with Ramirez, which was 4,000 kilo initial load. That's a lot, one load. And El Chapo's responsibility was to pick it up in Colombia, move it all the way through Mexico and across, and deliver it in probably Los Angeles. And his fee would be 40% of the load, so 1,600 kilos. Now that was a tad bit more than the going rate at the time, which was 37%. And but El Chapo said, no, you need to go with me because I'm gonna charge you a little bit more, but I'm gonna do it way faster. Ramirez was used to it taking about a month for a load of that size to get through. Ramirez was used to it taking about a month for a load of that size to get through. El Chapo said he could do it in a week, and in fact, he did. And as between 1990 and 96, he and El Chapo ran it up, as they say. El Chapo alone earned enough kilos to generate $640 million in the U.S. just off cocaine. So El Chapo had his hand obviously in marijuana and heroin in the U.S. Meth was probably, I don't know if the Mexicans were really big into meth yet, but I mean, marijuana business was bigger than the cocaine business. And that's just the United States. They had Europe as well. So that's when you could get a sense of how he was accumulating all this wealth. And in 96, Ramirez went to jail. He did a plea for like 28 years, but he got out after 4, and he got right back in business with El Chapo. But this time he told El Chapo, don't even bother giving me the cocaine back in Los Angeles. You can just sell it all. We'll just sell it to you for a price. And so being out on this boat made me think of a story involving boats to tell you, and that's a pretty crazy one. I mean, it shows, you know, how big the underworld economy can be, but also you still have a bunch of, I mean, even at the highest level, because you have to be a crazy person to want to be an actual kingpin or to pilot a boat with 20,000 kilos. So you have this captain who's moving, you know, $500 million in illegal substances for, you know, people that kill children just to, you know, collect drug debts or to spread fear, and you decide it's a good idea to start snorting yourself. I would assume that guy was tortured and killed. I would assume that guy didn't have a pleasant end. Juan Carlos Ramirez, he got on the stand looking like for a vampire. He was one of the big witnesses against Chapo that hurt him real bad. You know, the Flores twins from Chicago were some more. El Mayo's brother was another one. Vicente Zambada, El Mayo's son, was another one. So, yeah, that's the tale of Juan Ramirez Abadia, El Chapo, Amado Carrillo Fuentes. Oh, and one more little tidbit. There was another load right after that of 10,000 kilos that got hit by a hurricane, supposedly, and they could never find a shred of the boat, the crew, or the yayo. Was it lost in the hurricane, or did some enterprising captain use the hurricane as a ruse to just disappear and keep it? Who knows? And now that I think about it, the very story of the captain dumping that in the ocean, I mean, maybe he thought he could dump it and lie and come back and get it or something. Who knows? But Sinaloa, American dope on the seas.